all of you for being here. We truly do appreciate you taking the time to join us today. In front of you is the agenda of what we're going to be doing today. And I've promised my colleagues that I'd be as brief as I possibly can. Many of you know that that's not really feasible with me. So, Amy, do you want to go through the agenda or just share that and I'll go into
go ahead. Go ahead and
Okay.
share, go review the agenda. That would be great.
Oh, review. Okay, so welcome, agenda review, as it says. So we're going to have, we're going to review the child principal work to date that Amy and I have done with a lot of people that are on this, in this meeting, as well as the great people that we've engaged in the latest piece of work that we've done, which has brought us to this point. We are going to introduce Nina and Max and Stephanie to you, and they are going to each have a piece where they're going to be talking with you. We're going to have breakout sessions with a couple questions that we're going to ask folks to discuss in a short amount of time and come back and report out what was discussed within those breakouts. And then we are going to allow time for questions and answers for anything that you may have. And then we're going to wrap it up and what the next steps are going to be. Is that good? So briefly, history. So as most of you know, the domestic violence monies transitioned from DCF to DPH back in 2016. With that, a new procurement also was drafted and posted, which we are in the middle of. In this, the children's work was at the forefront of our attention. And Sue, you don't know I'm looking at you, but Sue Hubert was a primary driver behind this piece of the work in making sure that children's services remained a focal point of the domestic violence work that all of you are doing with the survivors within your programming. Therefore, we identified a child principal, or the children's principal, that it just very quickly expects agencies to work with children as primary survivors of domestic violence, versus the old procurement where it was more of a working with children as secondary survivors, and focusing on the parents' needs and what the parents' identified needs for their children were and are. So in that, early on in this procurement, Amy Waldman and I didn't decide, but took on the project of really looking at how services are delivered to children. And through that, we met with dozens of people, stakeholders, to initiate the conversation about what it is that we could provide to the community to support working with children as primary survivors. So that was 2 years ago. And here we are today at a kickoff event for future work and how we can support you. As we continue to identify areas of need that you guys have that we can be supportive with, whether it be training or other types of technical assistance. Which brings us to having Nina, Max, and Stephanie, who I consider to be experts in children's work and really value their knowledge and expertise with this. So having said that, I promised I'd be short, so I'm going to cut it off there. So Amy, what we are going into?
Yes, let's have Stephanie and Nina and Maxine share a little bit about themselves and a little bit about their work experience, so that people can get a sense of who will be facilitating this collaborative. And Maxine, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Max Weinreb. I'm actually an educational psychologist with many years of direct service and consultation to early childhood and around children, and had the pleasure of working for 25 years, maybe a little longer, I don't know, at the Child Witness to Violence Project at Boston Medical Center. And I likely have worked, maybe not directly with all of you, but probably in some way or another with your agency. I retired a while ago, and I always say that lasted about 10 minutes. And nobody lets you leave Boston Medical Center. So I was back there, and I remain back there doing some work with Child Witness to Violence, which is incredibly close to my heart. It was left, when I left, that was after Betsy Groves was the director, and then I was there for a while. And when I left, Nina very ably took the reins and has continued a wonderful, wonderful program. And it remains dear to my heart. And that's probably enough. Nina, I've sort of introduced you already. Go on.
Thank you, Max. A lot of adoration and love for Max. So as Max said, I'm Nina McConico, and I am the current director of the Child Witness to Violence Project, and I have been at the program for the past 11 years now. And prior to that, have always kind of been doing work with marginalized, kind of more vulnerable children and families, focused around different kinds of trauma exposure, and now kind of with more of an emphasis around thinking about domestic violence and other kinds of violence exposure. And I am more than thrilled to be here and engaging in the work with all of you. It's something that I'm really passionate about and also hold near and dear to my heart. And so I'm looking forward to spending the next year and many, hopefully, collaborating with you all, sharing with you, and also learning from all of you in this work. Stephanie?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And just want to say I'm so honored to be in the presence of so many esteemed colleagues who are also experts in the field. And it's such a pleasure to work with Nina and Max as well. I am a clinical psychologist. Josh was saying, you know, all the expertise we have. I was thinking more about being a dinosaur. I've been at Children's Charter, an outpatient trauma clinic in Waltham since 1994, when the DV unit began at DCF, which was then DSS, right? Sue, I don't know. I think, do you predate me? All right, a little bit, just a little bit. And have been part of the domestic violence team within Children's Charter's broader trauma clinic since its inception in '94. And I don't know at what point I became the director of the team. We became a division of the KEY program in 2000. And Children's Charter similarly is an agency that is dedicated to children and teens and families dealing with all kinds of trauma, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. The domestic violence team focuses on the intersection of all of those things. And more recently, and very excitingly, we've really kind of put a big focus on working with the growing bilingual population in Waltham and the undocumented immigrants, many of whom are teenagers and children who've come often unaccompanied. So it's been really interesting and exciting work. And I'm so happy to be working with all of you. Looking forward to this collaboration.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. And I forgot to introduce myself. I work with Josh. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Amy Waldman. I'm the co-director of capacity building and equity programs at DPH through our division. And I also am a clinician with a specialization in working with children and families. So it was really exciting to be able to support this initiative. So now we're going to hear from Nina, who's going to share some information about the recommendations from the child focus groups that we held now about 2 years ago at this point, to give you some context for all of this.
Thanks, Amy. Bear with me 1 second as I am trying to figure out how to share these in slideshow mode, but a part of my screen is not moving. Can you all see those slides okay? If I keep it that way?
I think so.
Yeah, okay. So some of you may already know this. It may have been at the original meeting where I was sharing some of the findings of some focus groups that were done. So it was myself and folks from Futures Without Violence, and we were collaborating with Josh and Amy at the time to try to really get a sense of what some of the community-based and shelter-based programs were doing and thinking as it pertained to children as primary survivors. And I think pointing to what Josh had said earlier, that historically that's not necessarily been the case of DV programs to kind of think of children in that way. So we wanted to get a sense of kind of what folks were doing, what were some of the strengths of the work that was happening in those spheres, but also trying to get a sense of what were some of the needs and the challenges and maybe some of the gaps, so that we could think about ways that the child principal work group could provide some kind of technical assistance to those programs. So we did not necessarily have, oh, and now it's not moving. Okay.
There you go. It moved.
It moved, okay. So we engaged with about 17 different organizations where we had about 20 advocates that attended, and we did these focus groups across 5 regional groups, and this was pre-COVID, if we can think back to the time when we were able to meet and convene in person. So it did have a very personable and intimate feel to it. And there were 15 DV programs, and there were 2 CEDV programs that managed to wiggle in there a little bit. And I will just say that we're being really intentional about engaging with the community-based and the shelter-based programs, because we felt like from our perspective, the CEDV programs were already had already been thinking about children as primary survivors and had already been doing so much of that work. And also those programs, a lot of them being clinically focused, had a lot of staff and a lot of exposure to thinking about more evidence-based clinical treatment models. So we were really focused on looking and seeing how we could provide some support to the community-based and the shelter-based programs. So I'm going to go at lightning speed and share just a little bit of some of the themes and the recommendations that came out of those focus groups, which you will see as I'm going through the slides, that there were a lot of recommendations that came out of there that kind of got us to this point where we are today. So one of the major themes that came out of those conversations was this idea around thinking about cultural relevance and race equity. I don't think that I need to tell anybody that's part of this meeting today that those are things that are, a huge problem within our society, where there are a lot of inequities that not only are staff and folks who are doing this work faced with, but a lot of the families and the children that we're working with as well. And folks were really having conversations about this hesitancy around having conversations about parenting. And so when you're thinking about that relationship between a caregiver and their child, like how do you engage in having those kinds of conversations? How do you provide feedback or maybe point out things that you are noticing, or how you even provide psychoeducation around child development in ways that still honor the caregiver as expert, right? And kind of honor their role in their children's lives, but also taking into consideration one's culture, one's racial background, their ethnic background, and all of the kind of socio-political experiences that they may have that really impact and kind of intersect with the place that they might find themselves in when they come to receive services at your program. So that was something that people really struggled with. And we're feeling like being able to have some kind of trainings focused on race equity, or thinking about some of the intersectionalities of these pieces would be something that would be really helpful to the work that they were all doing. And I had said that we also wanted to talk about, and we were really interested in hearing some of the strategies and some of the strengths and the things that programs were already doing. And so there were several programs that talked about being able to engage in self-reflection support groups for staff that they had, some of their frontline staff, and really prioritizing their efforts to think about diversity across the spectrum as it pertains to their staffing and their hiring practices. The second theme was around staff wellness and support. And I think acknowledging that this work that we all do and find ourselves in is incredibly challenging for a lot of different reasons. And that systems, I think in their best intentions, right, there are still areas in which we may fall short, or that we could benefit from paying a little more attention to. And so one of the things that really kind of rose front and center during those conversations was the fact that for a lot of programs, the child advocate or the child clinician is the only person in the organization that is tasked with thinking about responding to all things as they relate to children that are in the programming, and how that can feel incredibly overwhelming, that people were feeling that burden a lot, and not necessarily feeling like there were other members in their program or colleagues that they could go to and kind of lean into around support for these issues. And so thinking just a lot about some of the systems pieces and recognizing that there's a little bit of a culture shift that needs to happen for a lot of our organizations in kind of thinking about children, the caregiver-child relationship as something that's also essential to our work. And so while a lot of our systems are set up to think about the adult survivor and what they need, that their children are also part of that system. And so thinking about ways that we can help the survivor while also thinking about things that are important to their children and them as a unit. And then there were staff programs, almost all programs struggled with thinking about how to balance and think about staff wellness, right? And so being able to provide support for their staff that was more ongoing and sustainable, and recognizing that while there were a lot of efforts and there were a lot of things that were taking place in organizations, that those things related to self-care or staff wellness were also the very things that tended to fall by the wayside, as there were lots of competing demands around thinking about day-to-day functioning of kind of that direct, more on the ground work. The other theme that came up was around thinking about types of interventions. And I think the big challenge here was just thinking about access to being trained in some of the more evidence-based clinical interventions, or interventions that are kind of more like promising practices, and recognizing that there is not only is there a time commitment to getting trained in some of these modalities, but there's also a financial component for programs where they may not have the funding or the resources to be able to pay for the training opportunities to bring these skills to their staff. And then the other piece was around, so even when there were programs that felt like they had either in-house child therapy or parent-child clinical services that were available, or if they felt like they had great relationships with services with programs in their communities that were providing those services, that oftentimes there are long wait lists. that make it difficult for families to access the services in a more speedy way, and that there oftentimes tends to be a lack of cultural or linguistic diversity in those programs as well. And then I believe the last theme was around just thinking about interactions with DCF. And I think the primary theme that rose here was that thinking about DCF as an overall system, and just recognizing that there can be a lot of variability in ongoing caseworkers. There can be a lot of variability in folks who are screening when there is any kind of 51A that is being filed, and that sometimes that variability, or kind of not knowing how a particular caseworker is going to respond, or maybe not always necessarily having the confidence or the faith that services are going to be provided in a way that is going to be culturally sensitive. And again, I think thinking about more of those systemic pieces that impact families and their experiences. And so thinking about ways to kind of build some of the trust in those relationships there. And if there were ways to think about more either strategic or routine ways, or standardized ways, I should say, that practices are kind of happening within DCF. And then the last thing that I want to quickly say, because I think that my time is up, is just noting that there were also a few other needs that got identified that I think didn't necessarily fit evenly into kind of one bucket, or they were things that DPH didn't necessarily have control over, but perhaps could think kind of leveraging some of the connections that they have, or thinking of them as a state agency, ways that they might start to think about some more global policies and practices that kind of help with, barriers around affordable quality childcare, things like transportation, and thinking about housing. And then the last piece was around shelters. There was a lot of conversation about shelter-based rules, and there being a movement to kind of shift away from more regimented kind of rule-based structures in shelters that could feel in a lot of ways that it was kind of perpetuating, right, the violence that survivors had experienced, but thinking about some of the ways in which that sometimes was a little bit problematic when you thought about it from a more practical perspective. And I think that I will stop there.
So I think if folks want to see the slides, we'd be happy to send them out to people after, for those of you who haven't seen those slides before. Because some of the content from those focus groups we had intended to be part of these cohorts. So next we're going to hear from the team about the actual Child Focused Learning Collaborative and what it will entail, what the purpose is, and what the eligibility requirements are. And I'm going to put, if I can, the slides back up.
So I'm going to start. This is Stephanie, and I just want to go back a couple of months where we looked at what Nina just shared and sort of put our heads together to think about how to use that information as a springboard forward to continue to build awareness, skills, connections around children as primary participants in DV services. And we started with a two-part training that was really focused on healthy development, starting from infancy and going all the way through adolescence, to just provide a foundation of what that looks like and the range of things that that entails for folks to just have that as a baseline. And then we talked about, and that's why we're all here today, these learning collaboratives. And the hope and the purpose of these learning collaboratives is to really bring folks together who haven't in the past necessarily been working in programs where their children exposed to domestic violence is a primary focus of those program services, but might be a side program, or as Nina said, maybe a sole clinician or a sole person, child advocate in that role, which can be very isolating and lonely. Coming from a big team, it's so wonderful and important to have my peers to connect to. And so we thought it was really important to bring folks together in different regions. We talked about 3 regions, Boston and Southeast being combined, Northeast and Metro West being combined, and Central and Western regions being combined, to have a monthly convening that would run for about an hour and a half. We're looking for, and these are the, 1 or 2 people per program to participate. And the idea is that it will be truly a learning collaborative. We want to start a conversation and continue the conversation that Nina began around what some of the challenges are for all of you and what the training needs might be, how we can support better connections between child exposed to domestic violence programs and your programs, strengthening what's already there, bringing in child exposed to domestic violence folks eventually to those collaboratives, and really thinking together about bringing those children and teenagers front and center in our awareness, and how we think about how the program is set up and what the foundational approaches are. And to that end, we're really thinking about bringing in directors, senior administrative staff in a quarterly basis, because we want them to be hearing pieces of these discussions so that they can actually implement those changes. We want the folks that have the power to make whatever changes people feel are necessary to continue improving this work to be able to implement those, to really shift the mindset around the impact of domestic violence on children and teenagers, to make that a front and center issue throughout the Commonwealth. Did I leave anything out, Max?
No, wow, good work.
You want to say anything more about the eligibility?
I think it on one hand, it feels like a big commitment. On the other hand, we so often have trainings or meetings, and maybe we follow up once, but we don't often have the opportunity to keep coming back and digesting things and changing them around some and thinking about them. And this is a time that's where people can get together and do all of that. And of course, as they do that, get to know each other better and use each other as a resource, and get the support that is just often not there. So I certainly vote for the year long. And that's what much of this is about. And so it also can go anywhere from, an hour to an hour and a half, depending on what people's needs are.
And I think the one thing I would, sorry, Stephanie,
Oh, go ahead.
that I would add to what Max just said is that it really is, I know a year can sound like you're making a huge time commitment and it feels like a long time, but it really is rooted in some of the evidence and research and kind of what we know about how adults learn. And if you are really going to be serious about thinking about practice change, because I think a lot of what we're talking about can be, it's almost like flipping systems upside down, right? It really is a culture shift, a lens shift, and we're taking a pretty drastic shift in kind of approach to the work than I think has historically been done. And so if you're going to do that, then we know that one-off trainings and kind of coming to spaces 1 or 2 times doesn't achieve that goal. And so I think that's really the ultimate goal. And so as Max said, being able to sit with and grapple a lot of these issues and think kind of more reflectively, but also very practically about how you can start to implement some of these changes within your own practice, but also within your organizations, I think is going to be incredibly valuable. And then I think the only other piece that I think is not here is just around engaging with senior leaders. And we are thinking that we would like to be able to do that on a quarterly basis, because again, it goes back to that if we're thinking about practice change and systems change, that everybody in the system needs to be on board and everyone needs to be coming from the same understanding and the same place and be working on the same goal. And kind of really the only way that you get there is if you have buy-in and a commitment from the folks who are in positions to be able to make decisions about what happens in an organization.
Nina, can I add one thing to that? And that is, and I should have prefaced this in my introduction, and that is, this is just the beginning. And the work that we have done, we realized fairly early on that to engage all of the 9 service models that we fund within our procurement was just too large of a task to manage at one time. So through that, we identified community-based and residential programs to start this work. Having said that, you know, what the way I think about this is, you are the knowledge holder. You are attending these cohorts, and you are the knowledge holder, and you're bringing this back, and not just exclusive to your program, but to all programming across your agency, and how you can be the impetus, I guess, for making the changes in doing the work differently. And I'll be quiet again.
I think also, what did we determine the size of each group will be?
No more than 20 people.
Yeah.
So there'll be an intimacy and a connection, hopefully, that, as Nina mentioned, you know, a sharing of knowledge and experiences together that's so valuable.
And then with any more than that, people wouldn't be able to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
But we also know from research that up to 20 allows people to really share.
Before we move into breakout sessions, I think Stephanie's going to give some explanation about that, but are there any questions that people have at this point about the collaboratives?
Yeah, there was just a question about the Q&A. I mean, I just wanted to confirm, yes, there will be a question and answer.
Catherine, do you want to ask a question right now?
Yeah, if that's okay, I just want to get a little clarification. Josh just talked about a lot of us as the knowledge holders, and I understand, you know, getting together in these cohorts. What I'm trying to understand is, this is going to sound odd, but exactly what are we being offered? I mean, we're the knowledge holders. We can offer stuff to each other. But I think I keep hearing something about something else that we want to elevate towards, and I'm not sure who's offering that or how we get that. That's my
a great question. Does one of the team want to field that?
I could go. So I think, yes, great question. I think that is partly what we are going to talk about in the breakout groups, is thinking about, because I had started off by saying, we really are interested in, yes, there's the networking piece and the kind of relationship building piece for all of you and your respective work, but also wanting to find out what those TA needs are, and that we kind of all hold a certain body of knowledge and expertise that we can bring to those learning collaborative sessions. And so really trying to figure out and really inform the structure based on what all of you tell us about what are your most pressing needs and where are some of those gaps. And so I envisioned the sessions being a little bit of didactic kinds of, thinking about different content, but there'll also be opportunities to engage in some more like case-based kinds of work as well, and opportunity for discussion and knowledge sharing. So hopefully that helps to clarify a little bit. And if there's folks from the team that want to add something to that,
I
please
would
go
just
ahead.
add, Catherine, that, where you get to depends on where you're starting. And I think that's going to look differently for different programs. Some programs may already have buy-in from admin, may already have a fairly robust child focus, maybe multiple child focused staff members already available, and other programs may be in a very different place. So I think that's the learning from one another and, sort of getting to the best place for your program and your needs. So it'll be, individualized as it is also a group process.
Yeah, I think each is group. I don't think, I know that different people are going to have different needs,
Yeah.
different groups of people. And so we want to try to meet that. I mean, if we set something specifically didactic for the whole year, it really wouldn't be suitable.
There may also be opportunities for the cohorts to come together at times, do some learning together and in-service training together as well.
Yeah, we're figuring this out together. We're all going to be figuring this out as we go. And that's where we're going to move into the breakout sessions, because we want to start hearing your voices. So what we're going to do is divide you all up. You're each going to have 15 minutes. We have folks from this EDV world who have generously offered to facilitate discussion. So we have Nicole Modest, I hope I said your name right, Sue Huber, Kira Bruce, Meg Bart, and Michelle Penta, who are each going to take a breakout group. They're going to, in each group, you are going to quickly just introduce yourself, name and organization. You're going to open your Google Doc and you're going to, there's 5 spaces, so your group will have its own space to designate a note taker and someone to share out, because we'll come back together and we'll do some sharing. And the questions you're going to focus on are, what are the things that you're finding challenging in working with children and teens affected by DV and their families? And then what supports or help might you need or might be useful to address those, whether that's training, consultation, group supervision, didactic learning, whatever that is. And then we'll all come back and share, and we'll try to do some rank ordering of what the priorities are, so we can get a sense of those themes. And Nicole, I believe the Google Doc, will it be in the breakout rooms, Amy?
Yes, I'm going to put the link here right now. So whoever is the designated note taker should open that doc and take notes in each group. And then later everybody will have an opportunity to use the same doc to vote on the ideas that you generated.
Yeah. And of course, they can be COVID specific and non-COVID specific. I know we have an added layer of challenge for all of us doing telehealth and whether or not kids are in person or not. Some of you, if you're residential, you're living more face to face, but.
So is everybody clear about what we're doing? Everybody's going to get a breakout group shortly. And if you have any questions, just please feel free to put them in the chat and pop back into the large group and we can answer them.
One last thing, Amy,
yes.
and that is that Max, Stephanie, and Nina are going to be popping in and out as a check-in, just to see how the conversation is going.
And we're going to ask our DPH colleagues to stay behind with us.
They don't have a choice.
Okay, and just have folks from the residential and community-based programs participate with their facilitators.
So enjoy your conversations.
Jennifer, I hope that people can see the link in the chat in their breakouts?
That was going to be my question is, do they have access to the chat when
I
they're in a
think-
breakout?
No,
They would have had to click it before they
Right.
left.
exactly.
Oh, no.
Well,
I don't.
I'm
see
guessing
any
they're
way-
adaptive and they'll just take notes.
I don't
copious
see
notes.
my dots how to get to those breakout rooms for myself. I don't have any.
You have to go to, so the menu that's down on the bottom, Stephanie, where it says breakout rooms.
I don't have anything that says breakout rooms down at the bottom.
But
You
you
don't
have
have a little
more.
four
So I have
square?
a thing
Really?
that says more. It says more.
All right, so this is. that
Okay.
sounds
I'll do
good.
a Word version. I'll take some notes in Word.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Nina.
Yeah.
Okay, are we all set? Are folks back? Yes? Okay, Stephanie.
All right, so welcome back. It was such a pleasure to listen in and hear all the amazing brainstorming that was going on. So thank you all so much for engaging in this. And we're looking at the Google Doc and it looks amazing. So we're really excited to hear, and hopefully each group has appointed someone to be the sharer. And let's just start with group one. And whoever is the designated sharer from group one, would you like to just start with question one and share with us a little bit about what came up in your group?
I'm
I
sorry,
think-
is that our group? I actually don't know what number we were.
No, I
in.
think we were group one.
Yeah.
Catherine, can you share
Yeah.
some of the notes you took?
Yes. So for group one, it was when sheltering not impacting children's education. During supervised visitation, somebody had said both parents wanting staff to side with them. Survivor with children, how to talk with children who may mimic abusive behaviors, helping with parenting. So did I miss anything on that?
Any thoughts from group one about, needs, things that would be useful, TA ideas?
We in our group, we did talk about some parenting groups that some of us have ongoing and sharing the information from that. Maybe not places that can't run the whole series that is in the group, but things that they could learn from it. And also the opportunity to have advocates, talk to each other one-on-one and share information and struggles and challenges and solutions.
Thank you. Anything else from group one?
Do you want to know we had to make a list of
Yeah,
Yes.
ideas. Do you want those now?
please.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes, okay. So the list of ideas, ongoing support / trainings from funders, trainings on trauma, training on what to look out for as far as behaviors. And I think that someone mentioned a training to help parents identify what to look out for. I apologize if I'm incorrect. Identify resources to seek out childcare services while victims are being seen on site. Helping empower survivors to have children engage in services, and shelter to shelter communication. And somebody else is typing into my thing, but I don't know who that is.
That's me. I'm just.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
taking- yeah, I'm
Yeah.
taking collective
Okay,
Writing notes. Thank you so much, group one. That was great. Group two?
So in our group, and anybody else that was in the group, please feel free to jump in. Our group discussed a lot about the challenges that can come up when balancing parents' mental health needs and child safety within programs, especially within the responsibilities of mandated reporting, and some of those difficulties that can come up, especially if we have to refer parents or children out of our program if we don't have the staffing necessarily available on site to help aid in those different services that are needed. We also discussed some of the challenges with, serving children whose abusers may have legal custody, noticing increasingly complicated cases within the court systems for children in visitation, and also prepping children for visits with their abusive parent. We also discussed finding time to work with all different age groups. So there are a few different people that spoke about, the wide range of children that they work with age-wise, and finding developmentally appropriate groups for each person and finding the time to do that as well. And then we briefly talked about telehealth and the safety concerns that can come with that, not knowing who might be listening, who from, and just this kind of general feeling as we've been, doing telehealth services for almost over a year now, that feeling of being like zoomed out, as one person said, just having that, fatigue from being online. And one of the strategies that was mentioned was having just generalized social skill groups for children.
And Gabby, did you or someone else from group 2 have some ideas from question 2?
We did not get to that question. We really focused on question 1, I think. So unfortunately, we weren't able to get to that part.
Anybody have ideas off the top of your heads you want to chime in on? Just thinking about it? And we can always get information back from you guys. I know we asked a lot of you in 15 minutes, so thank you. That was awesome. Group 3, you guys want to share?
Hi, so I was in group 3, and like Kavi said, I did take some notes, but if anyone wants to add anything, they can do that as well. So some of the things that we heard was the challenging of clinicians and shelter staff working with a family that has experienced domestic violence, and that there are visitations. Sometimes there may be safety concerns because the child may not feel safe going with their parent, but they have to go because there is a court order or an agreement. So despite the support that the family is receiving, the staff is still concerned. Another concern is when there has been abuse from one parent to the child, but then the other parent still wants their child to see the parent that abused them because they think that they are a good parent. So they do want their child to spend time with the other parent. Sometimes it's challenging as well when judges are asking agencies to provide reunification therapy, which is something that is not very common and is a very targeted type of work. So along those lines, basically the legal system and the clinical world, they have major differences. Also asking clinicians to say that something is traumatizing to the child when in the majority of the cases, they can't state that for the court. And also when the advocates are working with both the adult and the child, it can be very overwhelming. So they were saying that they feel that the child should have their own case management person that can work with them and spend time with them, that they deserve their own advocate. So for the second questions, some of the strategies that we came up with were case consultation. So given being part of this group for the year commitment can be good to get other inputs from other professionals, as well as having more family involvement. So many times I may be working with a mom, somebody else is working with the person using violence, and then somebody else is working with a child. So about those professionals coming together and speaking about the family as a whole and not just focusing on the child, because we mentioned that whatever work you're doing with the child, if there's no parent involvement, there's no way of sustaining whatever new behaviors the child is learning. Trainings on the impact of trauma on child development, and coming together with other providers and meeting more consistently within your team. So a lot of times we may be working with a family in the same agency, but we may not necessarily be sharing basically the treatment plan that we are doing, or what are the goals that we have with that individual. I think that's all we had, but if I missed anything, my team can jump in.
think you covered it all. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Group 4. Going once?
Oh, can you hear me? Hi, I'm Meg with Group 4.
Hi, Meg.
Hi. Yeah, some of the topics we talked about were possibly looking at like childcare policies within shelter programs. Some people felt like the moms weren't able to really do errands or meetings of their own because they were dealing with the lack of childcare. So a possible solution around that, I think, could be case consultation, exploring whether that's possible within the shelter environment. And another thing we talked about, we are often working with children's and teens in the short term, especially in the shelter. Like, for example, a parent could be terminated from the program, and so we may have started this therapeutic relationship with a child, but suddenly it's cut off. So how can we work in a more solution-focused, short-term manner to try to, serve the kids as best we can, while also knowing that things could be cut short in the chaotic environment. And then there was also talk about specific trainings, like on evidence-based type programs, such as TheraPlay, or, working with family sessions, working on that bond between the parent and the non-abusive parent and the child within the shelter and community environment.
Thank you, Meg. That was excellent. All right, and last but not least, Group 5.
And Josh was nice enough to let me know that was our group. Thanks, Josh. Well, I will say that I think we could have used, probably double or triple the time. And I know that we are all balancing multiple competing demands. So not everybody in the group got a chance to really share. But with the information, we did sort of tease out one of the sort of challenges for interacting with families are when conflict arises, really looking for strategies with de-escalation. One of the words that I thought was powerful was how to heal, like where do we go from here? So maybe helping folks develop some trauma-informed responses and just being able to manage those challenging interactions and be able to move forward. Teasing out family needs if parents aren't specifically disclosing, what are some of the challenges that they're experiencing, having those conversations with folks so that they can be supportive of those needs. Challenges also, I think this is not new information, but really needing more resources in the community that give equal access to different language capacities that, I think that's something we're all struggling with, no matter what your program service model is. And how to make families feel safe, creating an environment, in shelter-based programs that is warm, inviting. We talked about infrastructure, like sort of like if the playground is, there's a playground structure, but it's not safe, funding for that or finding ways to sort of be able to make that happen. So it is a place that families can feel comfortable going out to, and even just like creating an environment that has more color and art and being able to like sort of just provide a space that feels like home for families. And also developmental stages. So some of the folks that were in our group feel really comfortable with younger age groups, but teens are a challenge, and feeling like they need some more support and how to sort of balance different needs and identify the need. If there's a child that's having a tantrum, or that anxiety might present differently in a teen. So sort of just teasing out those different things. I think teens are their own group. You either really feel confident and love working with teens, or you feel a little not confident. So that was one of the needs. And I believe that was everything. I do feel like we really could have used more time, but I know we did what we could. So hopefully that answered some questions.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That is perfect. And of course, this is just a beginning, right? This is just the tip of the iceberg. You guys did an amazing job in such a short time. It's remarkable. I think
Is there
Amy,
one
we'll
more-
move
Is there one
to-
more group?
Was there 6 groups? I think there was only 5.
Oh,
No, that
okay.
was it. That was the
Is
fifth group.
someone- yeah. So do we want to spend a little time sort of trying to prioritize, or do we want to shift to Q&A? What do you guys think?
So for me, Stephanie, there's a lot to digest here.
Yeah.
Some, and as I put in the chat, some really thoughtful conversations occurred in those breakouts. So thank you, everyone. And I really think it provides us a solid footing on how to move forward. I don't want to minimize folks being able to identify what their priorities are, but at the same time, I do want to give space to the Q&A as well.
Yeah.
And the next steps. Mainly the next steps, because I think there's a lot of great things that can be done moving forward. So, but I'm only one. I'll put it out to everyone and what works best for them.
I think the Q&A and next steps are important.
Yeah, I think given our time frame, it might be really helpful if people have questions for us to have a little time to share ideas and questions with
Yeah.
each other.
Thoughts hearing all that? I know my head's spinning.
And Stephanie, as you just mentioned, and I want to reinforce this, the questions we're posing are not intended to be answered in a vacuum. And you know, we really encourage you as you continue to think about this, if you have questions, to reach out to Amy and I and let us ask us those questions so that we can include them on the Google Doc as we continue this work. That makes sense, Amy?
Yeah, yes, I think that's right. Please feel free to reach out to us. And we'll be sending more information about the Learning Collaborative following this meeting as well.
And I'm curious, you know, for folks who didn't have a chance to really do much of a deep dive into question 2, having heard what other groups generated, I'm wondering if that sparked ideas from you or thoughts, wish lists.
So I have one. I tried not to not insert my opinion during the group that I was facilitating, but I can throw out an idea here. I mean, this was actually brought up in pieces, but the idea of being able to put a child development lens on helping advocates think about, you know, what do they keep an eye out for, and what does that mean in relation to the developmental stage of that child, and how they can help the kids with it, and how they can help the parents deal with those things. Yeah, so that's it.
Interesting that you say that, Sue, because we have been having conversations amongst ourselves, just thinking about how to bring in that child development lens as a framework for thinking about the work and kind of structuring conversations that happen in part of the collaborative. So,
Am I allowed to add? A couple things that resonated for me from the report outs. One of which is fear or concern around working with a intact family, for example, or working with a family where the abusive partner has visitation. And the second piece is the conversation around childcare and what the intent of the childcare is, for example. Is it in support of the parent and in attending appointments or having an individual advocacy session, or is it intended for the child and building the child or children's social skills? And I'm not looking for an answer, but I'm asking that in terms of, this is part of the big shift that we're looking at in terms of working with kids as primary survivors versus the survivor and supporting them through these various types of service. That's what resonated for me. Others? Don't be shy.
Should we talk a little bit about next steps?
Yes.
Was that going to be Max?
Hi, I do have a question before we go on to next steps. I'm looking at, we have 40, well, we had 47, now we have 46 participants. And I'm just wondering how many people here today actually are working in a shelter?
Maybe we hear, people can do thumbs up or yeah, or just wave. Yes.
Jane, can we say residential setting?
Yes, yeah. So I'm looking. I mean, today you're working in it. I see 2 people. I don't know if I don't have the whole screen.
Well, it looked like maybe
There's quite a few.
Looks like about 14 people.
Yeah.
Okay, out of 46. Okay.
Yeah, and then there's about 7 of us who are helping host this today. And so it's really more like 38, something like that.
Okay.
Did you want to say, Jane, why you were asking?
I'm just curious how many frontline staff were able to attend. Because I think that is so important to listen to what people who do this round the clock, 7 days a week really think. We're not going to have changes unless we really listen to them.
Yeah.
So there's also community-based advocates on the call too.
Yeah, right.
So maybe we can have a show of hands or thumbs up for the folks who are doing community-based frontline work.
And Jane, we agree with you.
Yes.
And I will say that in the focus groups, those were almost 100% folks who were frontline direct care staff.
And I just add, in our group, we did have multiple people that were working in a residential setting who hadn't been able or maybe not aware of prior instances where these meetings have occurred. So this was their very first one. So I think part of that was also the challenge in just digesting all of the information and wondering what are we here for, and how can we be helpful, and so maybe that's just something to think about too.
This is actually the first convening.
This is the very first.
Oh, okay. So there hadn't been any. I didn't know if there had been.
No, there was a lot of planning conversations, but.
And I'm wondering too. I just think we're all. I don't know how many emails you all receive a day, but I know we're all getting many more emails than we did. So I wonder too, just in the shuffle of things. Respecting that. And
I think the only thing, Nicole, that had happened before this was the 2-part developmental training.
Okay.
That it seemed like, Josh, from what your data showed, wasn't a lot of overlap with whoever's here today. I'm curious how many folks here today knew about that training, were able to attend that training or watch. Some of it was recorded.
I think there were 14 people who participated who were on this call.
Yeah. So that was the only piece that was sort of the springboard to this meeting today. So just in thinking about next steps, what we'd like to do is have folks think about, signing up for your regional learning collaborative. If you're interested, Amy has put in the chat, I believe, the Google Doc or the doc that you fill out. We made it really easy. You don't have to sign in blood. If you want to sign in today and then turns out someone else from your agency is better able to attend or makes more sense for them, or you go back and your supervisor says, you know, that doesn't work for whatever reasons, that's fine, but we'd rather have you be able to access the sign up today while we're all here, because like Nicole said, if we put it into the email flood, it's gonna get buried, and then, you know, the moment's lost. So we're trying to capture the moment while we're all here and we're all fired up and ready to go. And
And I
then,
think we'll send this link out to folks too, with the slides from today's presentation from Nina. And, you know, if you want to consider participating in one of the cohorts, please consider submitting an application, or one of your colleagues. That would be great.
as of right now, the first meeting is set for May 20th, a Thursday, from 10 to 11:30. And it will be virtual, so you don't have to travel, no traffic, right from the comfort of your home or office or shelter or wherever you are working.
Did you say
And
the
then I
part
think-
about really encouraging folks to be a part of the collaborative work?
We're really encouraging folks to be a part of the collaborative work.
And honestly, I just, in all sincerity, the information that came out of this meeting from the breakout groups that you guys had is just, for me, is just tremendous in terms of giving us some solid footing, coupled with the focus group information in terms of how we move forward and how we as the funder can identify areas of TA and training that will further support you in doing this work.
And just a further clarification around the time. So each of the regional groups will be happening at the same time. Just if that is helpful for anyone. And if you happen to be a program, maybe, I don't know if there's any that fall in 2 regions, or I don't know if there's a way for folks to note that on their application, Amy.
We listed their organization and their address, so.
I think that we generally know where people are located. There are a couple that are in more than one region, and I think it probably makes sense to look at the overall distribution and put them where, you know, where they're not going to cause an overflow.
Yep. So there's one other piece I do want to reiterate, and that's in terms of how we're just to further clarify how we're approaching this work, and that is that, as I had mentioned, you know, being inclusive of all the program models was just too big of a lift, and would just present such difficulties with really being able to make progress and have those deep, thoughtful conversations and how to do this work. There are other pieces that we fully intend to focus on, and Sue Hubert doesn't know I'm looking at her right now, but she's part of that, the work that, you know, we intend to continue in terms of our collaboration with DCF and other agencies that you guys encounter on a daily basis on behalf of the survivors that you work with. So I just felt it important to make that clear as well.
Yes, I would agree with Josh. And if there are any additional needs that you have that DPH can support you around working with kids and families, please let us know. Training ideas, other things you want to add that weren't shared today. I think that's it for us, yes? All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today. And we will send out these materials to you shortly. And so glad to have you join us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.